At a price of only $13 and with over 33,000 reviews, is it possible that this Smith & Wesson pocket knife is actually better than the knife that costs $250? Well, let's find out. And the first test, we'll see which brand of knife is the sharpest. Then we'll dull and then sharpen all the knives, and we'll see which one holds an edge the best. Unfortunately, not all the knives will survive without damage when they're dropped on the knife point. We'll see which knife opens and closes the smoothest. At a price of only $13, the least expensive pocket knife we'll be testing is made by Smith & Wesson. Quick and easy access with convenient pocket clip. The blade is made of high carbon stainless steel. The blade length is 3.1 inches. The handle is made of aluminum. Ambidextrous thumb knobs make it ideal for everyday carry. The blade is secured in the open position with a liner lock. The Smith & Wesson is made in China. The Smith & Wesson weighs 101 grams. To test the initial sharpness of the knives, I'll be using this Best Certified Knife Sharpness Tester. The tester came with this chart. A double-edged razor blade is the sharpest between 50 and 75. A utility razor blade is between 150 and 200. New high-end cutlery edges are between 250 and 350. Edges that need maintenance are 400 and up. I'll be using these disposable test clips and we'll replace them between each of the tests. The tester will measure the downward force it takes to cut through the test media. And the Smith & Wesson cut through the test media at 165, which is very sharp for a $13 knife. At a price of $18 is this Opinel brand. The handle is made of hard, durable beechwood from France. This essential tool is unchanged since 1890. Opinel's carbon steel is extremely hard. Stainless VeriBlock safety ring has two sections, one fixed and one sliding for secure locking. The Opinel pocket knife is made in the French Alps. The Opinel is very light at only 45 grams. And the Opinel just isn't very sharp, making the cut at 280 compared to only 165 for the Smith & Wesson. At a price of $21 is this K-Bar Dozier Folding Hunter Knife. The blade length in the K-Bar is 3 inches. Award-winning lockback design. Affordable, practical, all-purpose knife appropriate for daily tasks. The K-Bar is made in Taiwan. The K-Bar weighs 65 grams. And the K-Bar is only slightly sharper than the Opinel at 275. At a price of $24 is this Ontario Knife Okc Rat 2. Quick and easy access with dual thumb studs and 4-way reversible pocket clip. Secure ambidextrous features. The 4.1-inch closed-length handheld size is perfect for everyday carry. The handle size is designed for comfort and performance. The Ontario Knife Company knife is made in Taiwan. The Ontario weighs 79 grams. And the Ontario moves into second place behind the Smith & Wesson at 185. At a price of $35 is this CJRB brand. G10 handle material, 3-inch blade, drop point style. The blade thickness is 0.106 inches. Blade hardness, HRC 59 to 61. Includes a liner lock. The CJRB is made in China. The CJRB weighs 76 grams. The CJRB did fairly well at 215, but that's not nearly as sharp as some of the other brands. At a price of $42 is this CRKT Endorser. Safe and secure. Safety integrated thumb stud prevents accidental opening. Outburst assisted opening deploys blade fast. Black coating improves corrosion resistance. The CRKT is made in China. The CRKT Endorser weighs 87 grams. And the CRKT Endorser performed about the same as the CJRB at 230. At a price of $46 is this SOG Twitch 2. Fast opening SOG assisted technology. Satin polished SOG sharp blade. Low carry pocket clip. Hard anodized aluminum handle. The SOG is made in Taiwan. The SOG weighs 72 grams. And the SOG is by far the sharpest yet at 125. Very impressive. At a price of $50 is this Civivi Elementum. Smooth, effortless blade opening. It claims to be a very sharp pocket knife. Lightweight. The Civivi brand is made in China. The Civivi weighs 81 grams. The Civivi is the third sharpest knife yet with a sharpness of 180. We'll be testing two knives made by Spyderco. The first one costs $60 and it's the Spyderco Tenacious. Ergonomically milled for prolonged fatigue-free cutting. 3.39-inch black stainless steel blade. Durable G10 laminate handle. The Spyderco Tenacious is made in China. The Spyderco Tenacious is the heaviest yet at 115 grams. The Spyderco Tenacious just moved into second position behind the SOG with a sharpness of 150. At a price of $60 is this Buck Knives 110 Folding Hunter Lockback Knife. Genuine ebony hardwood handle. Stainless steel blade has excellent strength, edge retention, and is corrosion resistant. We're going to test that. 3 3/4-inch razor sharp clip point blade. Comes with a very nice leather sheath. A forever warranty. The Buck Pocket Knife is made in USA. The Buck 110 is by far the heaviest yet at 209 grams. And the old Buck 110 knife is even sharper than the Spyderco at a very impressive 145. At a price of $80 is this Kershaw Link pocket knife. 3 1/4-inch blade with speed-safe opening. Retractable steel blade has carbon and chromium for strength and corrosion resistance. Built with extremely reliable and durable 42HC stainless steel. Both sharp and sturdy. The Kershaw knife is made in USA. The Kershaw weighs 137 grams. The Kershaw performed very well at 175, but not quite as sharp as some of the other brands. At a price of $128 is this Cold Steel AD10. Razor sharpness for unprecedented cutting. Ambidextrous thumb stud and dual pocket clips for lightning quick deployment. Features an ultra-wide saber ground blade with sturdy drop point, perfect for everyday carry. Ultra-reliable locking mechanism. We're going to test that. Made with premium ultra-tough S35VN steel. The Cold Steel knife is made in Taiwan. The Cold Steel weighs 202 grams. The Cold Steel is nearly as sharp as the Kershaw at $185. At a price of $147 is this Spyderco Para 3. Offers superior balance edge retention and low friction cutting performance. Reduced handle thickness provides excellent support for knife's compression lock. The blade length is 2.95 inches. Compression lock's high-strength mechanism locks blade securely open during use. Allows blade to be easily and safely closed with only one hand. The Spyderco is made in USA. The Spyderco Para 3 weighs 95 grams. And the Spyderco Para 3 just took the lead from the SOG with a very impressive sharpness of 120. At a price of $196 is this Zero Tolerance 450CF. 3¼ inch DLC coated S35VN stainless steel blade. All black carbon fiber and titanium handle scales. KVT ball bearing opening. Frame lock. The Zero Tolerance is made in USA. The Zero Tolerance weighs 69 grams. And the Zero Tolerance just isn't very sharp compared to most of the other brands at $240. And the most expensive brand we'll be testing at $258 is the Benchmade 940BK. Reverse Tonto blade knife. Durable 6061 T6 aluminum handle. Anodized, fully ambidextrous, and smooth satin grip. Axis locking mechanism ensures safety and a smooth open and easy close. Light as a feather for easy carrying and comfortable grip. The Benchmade is made in USA. The Benchmade weighs 82 grams. And the Benchmade performed very well, but it's not nearly sharp enough to move into the lead with a sharpness of 170. So the knife with the sharpest edge right out of the box is the Spyderco Para 3 with a sharpness of 120. The SOG was nearly as sharp at 125, Buck 145, Spyderco Tenacious 150, and the $13 Smith & Wesson at 165. If the weight of the folding knife is a factor in your purchasing decision, the Opinel is very light at only 45 grams. The K-Bar weighed 65 grams, Zero Tolerance 69, SOG 72, and CJRB 76 grams. Up next, let's see how much pressure it takes to unlock the knife blades. I'll press on the blade release and the scale will measure the downward pressure. And it took 1,359 grams to release the blade, which is very close to 3 pounds of pressure. And it took 2,096 grams, or very close to 4.5 pounds, to release the blade on the K-Bar. And the Ontario moves into the lead, releasing the blade at 1,155 grams, or about 200 grams less pressure than the Smith & Wesson. The CJRB performed nearly as well as the Ontario at 1,178 grams. And the CRKT didn't waste any time releasing the blade to move into the lead at 1,007 grams, or about 150 grams less than the Ontario. And the SOG required the most amount of pressure yet at 2,281 grams, or about 180 grams more than the K-Bar. And the Civivi performed very well at 1,089 grams, but came up about 82 grams short of matching the CRKT. And the Spyderco is pretty stiff at 1,811 grams, or about 400 to 500 grams more than the other knives with the liner locks. And the lockback refused to release the blade on the buck knife and overloaded the scales. I used a different set of scales and it took right at 13 pounds, which is quite a bit of force. And the Kershaw performed the best yet, releasing the blade at only 944 grams. Very impressive. Just like the buck knife, the Cold Steel also needed a larger scale, and it took 12 pounds to release the blade. And the Spyderco Para 3 released the blade at 1,318 grams, or about 350 grams more than the Kershaw. And the Zero Tolerance moves into the lead over the Kershaw with a very impressive release pressure of only 822 grams. And the Benchmade has a very unique blade lock release, and it required the least amount of pressure yet at only 526 grams. Very impressive. If you're looking for a knife that releases the blade with the least amount of pressure, the Benchmade came out on top at 526 grams. The Zero Tolerance also performed well at 822 grams, Kershaw 944, CRKT 1007, and Civivi 1089 grams. Let's test how smoothly the blades open once again using the scales. Since some of the knives have spring-assisted blades, we'll start at midpoint. And the Smith & Wesson is very stiff, and it took 126 grams to move the blade into the fully open position. The Opinel performed slightly better than the Smith & Wesson at 122 grams. And the K-Bar takes even more pressure to open than the Smith & Wesson at 155 grams. And the Ontario is very smooth and it only took 28 grams to fully open the knife. And the CJRB moves into the lead over the Ontario at only 15 grams of pressure. And the CRKT is a very smooth opening knife at 25 grams, but the CJRB holds on to the lead. And the SOG is very smooth at midpoint, but it becomes a little bit stiffer near the fully open position at 38 grams. And the Civivi is nearly as easy to open as the CJRB at only 17 grams. The Spyderco takes more effort to open than a lot of the other knives at 92 grams. And the buck is extremely stiff, and it takes by far the most pressure to open of all the knives at 356 grams. And the Kershaw performed better than average at 45 grams. The cold steel is a really large and heavy knife, and it still performed fairly well at 54 grams. And the more expensive Spyderco takes a little bit less effort to open than the less expensive Spyderco Tenacious at only 38 grams. And the zero tolerance has a ball bearing opening, and it's extremely smooth at only 4 grams and moves into the lead. Very impressive. And the Benchmade is also very smooth, but not quite as smooth as the zero tolerance at 22 grams. The blade on the zero tolerance takes the least amount of effort to open at only 4 grams. CJRB finished in second at 15 grams, Civivi 17, Benchmade 22, and CRKT 25 grams. Let's test the durability of the factory edge next using this ironwood. This stuff's incredibly hard and will dull the knives for sure. I'm going to make 100 back and forth passes with 5 pounds of weight on top. And the Smith & Wesson started out at 165, and it actually held up really well, making the cut at 260. And the Opinel started relatively dull at 280, and it definitely needs to be sharpened now at 370. The K-bar started out nearly as dull as the Opinel, but it held an edge much better, making the cut at 325. The Ontario started off at 185, and it's almost as sharp as the Smith & Wesson now at 270. Compared to some of the other blades, the CJRB started off fairly dull at 215, and that helped it a lot, 225. The CRKT also started off pretty dull at 230, and it held up really well at 250. The SOG started off extremely sharp at 125 and is still very sharp at 200, which is the best yet. The Civivi started off pretty sharp at 180 and dulled to 245. The Spyderco Tenacious started off pretty sharp at 150 and performed fairly well at 225. And the buck started off even sharper than the Spyderco at 145, and it held an edge just as well at 220. The Kershaw performed fairly well, going from a sharpness of 175 to 265. The cold steel delivered excellent blade edge retention, going from 185 to 205. And the Spyderco Para 3 started off a little too sharp, and that really hurt it, 265. The zero tolerance began at 240 and made the cut at 290. And the Benchmade started off very sharp and lost quite a bit of sharpness at 290. After exposure to ironwood, the SOG is the sharpest at 200. The cold steel is nearly as sharp at 205, buck 220, CJRB and Spyderco Tenacious 225. To make this more of a fair test, I'll go ahead and sharpen all the knives, this time using a 17-degree angle. After forming a burr with the 100 diamond stone, I'll make 10 passes with the 200 grit. I'll then make 15 passes with 400, 600, and 800 grit. I'll finish the sharpening process with 30 passes with 1000 grit. I'll avoid sharpening the tip of the knife since I'll be testing blade tip durability next. The blade edge looks really nice, so I'll go ahead and make 30 back and forth passes across the leather strop. The brand new Smith & Wesson had a sharpness of 165, and now it's even sharper than new at 125. The Opinel started off relatively dull at 280, and now it's sharper than new at 145. The K-bar started off nearly as dull as the Opinel at 275, and it's a lot sharper now at 145. The Ontario is just as sharp as the Smith & Wesson at 125. The CJRB started off at 215 when new, and now it's the sharpest knife yet at 115. The CRK was relatively dull when new at 230, and now it's at 120. The SOG was very sharp when new at 125, and it's even sharper now at 120. The Civivi is even sharper than the SOG and moves into a two-way tie with the CJRB at 115. The Spyderco Tenacious started out at 150, and now it's even sharper at 120. The buck was pretty sharp when new at 145, and it's even sharper now at 120. And the Kershaw is also sharper than new at 120. The cold steel started out new at 185, and now it's even sharper at 125. And the Spyderco started off extremely sharp at 120 when new, and it's just as sharp now at 120. The zero tolerance was relatively dull at 240, and now it's extremely sharp at 120. The Benchmade was relatively sharp at 170, and now it's in a three-way tie for the sharpest blade yet at 115. Now that all the knives have been sharpened to very close to the same sharpness, I'll go ahead and switch out the ironwood for a piece of hedge apple. This time I'm just going to make 30 passes across the hedge apple, and then we'll see how well the knife edges hold up. With all the blades sharpened to 17 degrees and approximately the same sharpness, this is really going to help us figure out which knives do the best job of holding an edge. And the Smith & Wesson really struggled starting out at 125 and dulled quite a bit to 230. And the Opinel performed slightly better than the Smith & Wesson at 215. The K-bar performed slightly better than both the Smith & Wesson and the Opinel at 200. The Ontario made the cut at 240, which isn't nearly enough to take the lead. And the CJRB moves into the lead, making the cut at 190. And the CRKT moves into third position behind the Opinel at 225. And the SOG performed by far the best yet, making the cut at only 160. The Civivi performed about the same as the CRKT at 230. The Spyderco Tenacious did a great job of holding an edge and moves into the lead at 150. The Buck started off very sharp at 120 and it did a great job of holding an edge at 145. The Kershaw did a great job of holding an edge with a sharpness of 145. And the cold steel held up really well at 160. And the Spyderco Para 3 made it a three-way tie for first place, making the cut at 145. The Zero Tolerance performed nearly as well as the Spyderco Para 3 at 150. The Benchmade is very sharp at 165, but 20 points behind the leaders. And the Spyderco Para 3, Kershaw, and the Buck did the best job holding an edge with a sharpness rating of 145. The Spyderco Tenacious and the Zero Tolerance performed very well at 150. I'll be dropping each of the knives from 48 inches through a pipe just to make sure the knives stay straight. The knives will be landing onto a piece of mild steel. And the Smith & Wesson held up just fine with no visible damage to the blade tip. If you look very carefully, you can see the very tip of the blade break off of the Opinel from the impact. Unfortunately, there's quite a bit of damage. The K-bar held up a little bit better than the Opinel, but the blade tip now has a small bend. The Ontario experienced about as much damage as the Opinel with a really bad bend to the blade tip. The CJRB experienced about the same amount of damage as the blade tip on the K-bar with a small bend. And the CRKT experienced quite a bit of damage compared to the CJRB with a pretty bad bend at the blade tip. And the SOG held up extremely well with no visible damage to the blade tip. Unfortunately, the Civivi experienced a pretty significant amount of damage to the tip of the blade. The Spyderco is a very robust blade and it held up just fine with no visible damage to the blade tip. Unfortunately, the weight of the knife probably played a factor in it experiencing quite a bit of damage to the blade tip. The Kershaw is also relatively heavy and experienced a pretty bad bend at the blade tip. The cold steel is nearly as heavy as the Buck knife, but it still held up just fine with an extremely small chip to the tip of the blade. And the Spyderco held up really well and looks nearly as good as new. And the Zero Tolerance is a very light knife, and that probably was a factor. Just a very small chip to the tip of the blade. And the Benchmade is also a very lightweight knife, and it handled the impact very well with very little visible damage. If you're looking for a knife that is the least likely to experience blade tip damage from an accidental drop, the Smith & Wesson, SOG, Spyderco Tenacious, Cold Steel, and Spyderco Para 3, Zero Tolerance, and Benchmade held up the best with a rating of 1. A blade lock is an important safety feature which should be able to handle at least 25 pounds of force without damaging the knife. To test this, I'll secure each of the knives in a holder and apply 25 pounds of downward force on the end of the knife blades. And the Smith & Wesson easily handled the 25 pounds. The knife lock still performs just fine. Unfortunately, the Opinel couldn't handle the pressure and only made it to around 7 pounds. I went ahead and tested all the other knives, and fortunately, all of the other knives held up just fine with no lock failures, and all the knives continued to perform just as new. So let's move on to our final test and we'll compare the corrosion resistance of each of the brands. I'll be using a saltwater mix that has a very small amount of hydrogen peroxide and vinegar to accelerate the corrosion process. And it's been a few hours since the test began, and there's quite a bit of rust. The Smith & Wesson is covered pretty much entirely in paint, and that really seemed to help. Unfortunately, the Opinel experienced more rust than most of the other brands. The K-bar and the Ontario performed about the same. The CJRB actually performed a little bit better than the K-bar. You can see some rust coming through the paint on the CRKT. There's a small amount of rust on the SOG as well as the Civivi. Paint on the Spyderco did a pretty good job of blocking the rust. There's some very superficial rust on the Buck. Unfortunately, the coating on the Kershaw just didn't do a very good job of blocking the rust. The Spyderco Para 3 seems to perform slightly better than the cold steel. There's very little rust on the Zero Tolerance. The Benchmade also performed very well. So which knife is the best? In my opinion, it's very close between the Benchmade, the Zero Tolerance, as well as the Spyderco Para 3, but those three knives are very expensive. If I had to choose one of the three most expensive knives though, I would go with the Zero Tolerance. It's a very smooth operating blade, the blade edge is very durable, and the tip of the blade held up very well. If I had to choose a less expensive knife, I would definitely go with the SOG. It's a very good knife for the money, under $50 is a great value. And finally, why not just go with the Smith & Wesson? It seems like a great deal, very affordable at $13, and it performed very well. All the videos in this channel, including this one, are viewer suggested. So if you have a video idea, I hope you'll take time to leave a comment. Thanks so much for watching, please take care and look forward to next time.